The moment you stopped chasing, something inside the dynamic changed. Not because you became cold, not because you tried to punish them, but because for the first time their distance stopped controlling your behavior. They were used to pulling away and watching you move closer. They expected questions, explanations, emotional reactions, maybe another attempt to repair the connection. Then suddenly there was silence, calm silence, and that silence carried a message far stronger than an argument ever could. You were no longer willing to participate in the same pattern. Research on avoidant attachment has connected avoidance with withdrawal during relationship conflict. While a partner's pursuit can create a cycle of withdrawal and demand that leaves both people dissatisfied. But here is the lesser-known part. When you stop reacting, you are removing the predictable response their behavior once produced. Suddenly, they may start asking themselves why you are quieter, why you are no longer explaining yourself, why your attention is no longer guaranteed. And this is where the real psychological shift begins. Your silence starts revealing something their distance once allowed them to avoid seeing. In this video, you will learn why calm distance can affect an avoidant differently from emotional confrontation, why your boundaries can change the way they perceive you, and why the strongest response is rarely revenge. Stay until the end, because the final lesson changes the entire meaning of respect. It is not about making someone chase you. It is about becoming someone who no longer needs to chase anyone. I am Jordan Peterson, and welcome to Conscious Decision. Subscribe to the channel, because here we explore the psychology behind relationships, emotional patterns, and the decisions that can completely change your life. This is where everything changed. You did not explode. You did not send a long message. You did not demand an explanation. You simply became calm, and strangely enough, that calmness can create more psychological tension than anger ever could. Anger gives the other person something to react against. It creates noise. It creates drama. It gives them a reason to retreat further. Calmness removes that escape route. You were no longer trying to convince them of your value. You were no longer asking for reassurance every time they became distant. Their inconsistency stopped receiving an emotional reward from you. You still cared, but your behavior stopped proving that their withdrawal could control your emotions. That distinction matters. Emotional detachment is not the same as pretending not to care. It means your feelings no longer dictate every decision. For an avoidant person, this shift can feel unfamiliar. They may be accustomed to creating distance and then experiencing relief when the emotional pressure disappears. But your calm withdrawal creates something different. There is no argument to win. There is no emotional reaction to manage. There is no desperate pursuit waiting behind their silence. Suddenly, they are left alone with their own behavior. And this can trigger a strange form of awareness. They may notice your absence more clearly because you are not filling that absence with messages, explanations, or emotional demands. The space becomes noticeable. Your quietness becomes information. They may begin wondering whether something inside you has changed. Perhaps you finally reached the point where their inconsistency stopped feeling mysterious and started feeling unacceptable. That is a powerful psychological shift. You are no longer reacting to every movement they make. You are observing. You are watching patterns. And slowly they may realize that the person they could once pull closer or push away is no longer responding according to the old rules. Here is the moment the entire pattern can change. They pulled away, expecting you to move closer. They became distant, expecting another message. They created silence, expecting you to fill it. But this time, you chose yourself. You did not chase the connection at the cost of your own dignity. You did not turn their distance into a personal emergency. You simply stepped back and allowed their behavior to speak for itself. For someone with strong avoidant tendencies, independence can carry enormous psychological importance. Closeness may sometimes feel like pressure, especially when intimacy is experienced as a threat to personal freedom. Research on attachment avoidance suggests that highly avoidant individuals can become uncomfortable with dependence and may use emotional or behavioral distance to protect their sense of autonomy. That does not mean they cannot love. It means closeness can activate defenses that make distance feel safer. Now notice the paradox. You stopped chasing, yet you also stopped trying to control them. You gave them the independence they seemed to want, but you gave yourself independence too. That creates a completely different dynamic. There is no demand coming from you. There is no emotional pressure forcing them into a conversation. Yet there is also no guarantee that you will remain endlessly available. And that uncertainty matters. They may suddenly realize that your presence was never something they possessed. It was something you freely gave. Your attention was a choice. Your patience was a choice. Your willingness to keep understanding them was a choice. Once those choices are no longer automatic, the relationship can look very different from their perspective. They may begin noticing that your life continues without their approval. You are not standing at the emotional door waiting for them to decide whether you are worthy of closeness. You are moving forward. And that can challenge an assumption they never consciously realized they were carrying, the belief that distance would always bring you running back. Now the pattern has changed, and they are left wondering why you are no longer following the old script. Here is something people often misunderstand about respect. Respect does not come from demanding it. It often appears when your behavior quietly demonstrates that you respect yourself. The moment you stopped accepting inconsistency, something about your position changed. You were no longer saying, "Please treat me better." You were showing through your actions, "This is the way I allow people to treat me." A boundary is not a punishment. It is not a threat. It is not a strategy designed to make someone afraid of losing you. A real boundary simply defines the conditions under which you are willing to participate. You can care deeply about someone and still refuse repeated disrespect, mixed signals, disappearing acts, or emotional confusion. That distinction is important because self-respect becomes visible through behavior long before it becomes visible through words. For someone accustomed to maintaining distance, your boundary can create an unfamiliar experience. They may expect you to keep waiting. They may expect another explanation, another chance, another emotional conversation. But suddenly your availability is no longer unlimited. You are not slamming the door. You are simply refusing to stand outside it indefinitely. And this can change their perception of you. Your attention no longer feels automatic. Your presence is no longer something they can take for granted. They may begin recognizing that your patience was not weakness. Your kindness was not desperation. You were choosing to remain connected, and now you are choosing to protect yourself. This is where the supposed ego bruise becomes something much deeper. You did not destroy their confidence. You challenged an assumption. You showed that access to you requires mutual effort. That can force them to reconsider the way they approach the relationship. Instead of seeing you as someone who will always remain available, they may begin seeing you as a person with standards, limits, and a life that continues regardless of their decisions. And once that realization enters the dynamic, even ordinary interactions can start carrying a different weight. Something strange begins to happen when your behavior no longer matches the story they built around you. They may have believed you would always be there. They may have told themselves that you cared more, that you would eventually reach out, or that their distance could never truly make you walk away. That story can feel comfortable because it gives a person a predictable explanation for the relationship. But then your behavior changes and suddenly the explanation stops working. You are quieter. You are less available. You are no longer explaining every feeling or trying to repair every moment of distance. Nothing dramatic happened, yet the evidence has changed. And human beings are forced to reconsider their beliefs when reality repeatedly contradicts them. This is where internal conflict can begin. They may start asking themselves questions they previously avoided. Why is this person not reaching out? Why are they suddenly comfortable with space? Why are they not reacting the way they used to? Did I push too far? Did I misunderstand their patience? Was their constant effort actually a choice rather than something guaranteed? That last question can be especially powerful. Perhaps they interpreted your availability as proof that you would never leave. But availability is not permanence. Someone can care deeply and still decide that a one-sided dynamic is no longer acceptable. Once they recognize that distinction, their old interpretation begins to weaken. And this is not necessarily about creating fear. It is about creating clarity. Your behavior becomes a mirror. It shows them the consequences of their own pattern without you needing to lecture them about it. They can no longer rely on your emotional reactions to distract from their own choices. They may even begin remembering moments differently, the messages they once ignored, the patience they once assumed would continue forever, the times you tried to understand their silence instead of confronting them. Those memories can take on a different meaning when your presence is no longer guaranteed. And slowly the question changes from why are they acting differently to something much more uncomfortable. Did I contribute to this distance myself? Sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone is the space they once demanded. They wanted distance, so you stopped fighting it. They wanted room, so you stopped chasing them into it. And then something unexpected can happen. The distance they created begins to feel different once you are no longer standing on the other side, trying desperately to close it. This is the strange irony of withdrawal. A person may step back because closeness feels overwhelming, only to discover that repeated distance can eventually create the very separation they never consciously wanted. Research on attachment patterns has linked avoidant tendencies with withdrawal during conflict, and these patterns can contribute to poorer relationship outcomes when both partners become trapped in a cycle of pursuit and retreat. But now your behavior has changed. You are not pursuing. You are not filling every silence with another message. You are not asking why they disappeared. The usual emotional noise is gone, and in that quiet, the actual distance becomes easier to notice. They may begin feeling the absence of conversations that once seemed guaranteed. The familiar attention is missing. The person who once tried to repair every uncomfortable moment is no longer rushing forward. Suddenly, their own withdrawal has consequences they cannot control, and this can create an uncomfortable internal experience. They may start wondering whether the distance is still serving its original purpose. Was the space supposed to bring relief? Was it supposed to protect their independence? Then why does the silence suddenly feel so noticeable? The important part is that you are not creating this discomfort for them. You are simply refusing to erase it. Their distance remains their choice, while your response becomes your choice. That distinction changes the entire psychological balance. Now they are left with something they may rarely encounter: the opportunity to experience their own pattern without someone else immediately repairing the emotional gap. And once that gap becomes real, their attention may turn toward the person who stopped trying to cross it. Here is where independence becomes far more powerful than pretending not to care. You did not suddenly become emotionless. You did not erase your feelings. You simply stopped making their attention the center of your emotional world. Your life continued. Your responsibilities continued. Your interests continued, and that difference can be surprisingly visible to someone who was accustomed to being the main source of your emotional focus. Healthy independence is not emotional detachment. Detachment says, I do not need anyone. Independence says, I can love someone without losing myself. That distinction matters. You can miss someone without chasing them. You can care without abandoning your standards. You can want closeness while still being capable of standing alone. For someone with strong avoidant tendencies, this can create a different experience of intimacy. Research on attachment suggests that autonomy and connection are not necessarily opposites. In healthy relationships, people can maintain a sense of personal identity while also developing emotional closeness. The relationship becomes a place where two complete individuals choose each other, rather than one person becoming responsible for the emotional survival of the other. Now your behavior begins communicating something without words. You are not waiting beside the phone. You are not measuring your worth through their responses. You are not changing your entire mood because they became distant. You are living. And when someone realizes that your life remains meaningful without their constant attention, they may begin seeing you through a different psychological lens. Your independence also removes pressure. There is less emotional demand, less fear of being responsible for your happiness. Less sense that closeness means losing freedom. At the same time, your presence becomes something freely chosen rather than desperately needed. That can change the emotional atmosphere between two people. Your affection becomes lighter, your attention becomes more intentional. Your boundaries become clearer, and your absence becomes more noticeable because your presence was never built around dependency. They may begin to recognize something they overlooked before. You were not asking them to become your entire world. You were asking for a relationship where two people could build separate lives while still choosing to meet in the middle. Something changes when your behavior becomes unpredictable to the old pattern. Before, they could pull away and almost anticipate your response. Distance appeared and you moved closer. Silence appeared and you reached out. Their withdrawal created movement from you, but now there is no automatic reaction. You are simply living your life, and that can shift their attention in a way they did not expect. Instead of deciding when closeness happens and when distance happens, they may begin watching, not necessarily in some dramatic or conscious way. It can begin quietly. They notice whether you are still waiting. They notice whether your energy feels different. They notice whether you still respond with the same urgency. And beneath those observations sits a much deeper question. Did this person actually move forward? That question can become uncomfortable because the old dynamic depended on predictability. They knew distance would create a certain response. Now the response is missing. You are not chasing them through every silence. You are not trying to decode every small signal. You are not constantly proving that you are still emotionally available. And that forces a reversal. The person who once controlled the distance may suddenly become more attentive to it. They may wonder why you seem calmer, why your life appears to continue, why you are no longer trying to pull them closer. The very space they once created begins revealing information about your emotional independence. This does not mean every avoidant person will suddenly chase. Human behavior is far more complicated than that, but a changed pattern can create changed awareness. When you stop responding according to the old script, the other person has less certainty about their position in your life. And uncertainty can make people pay closer attention. They may start remembering conversations. They may notice small changes in your communication. They may wonder whether your silence means acceptance, disappointment, or genuine movement forward. The important shift is not that you are trying to make them watch you. You are simply no longer performing for their attention. You have stepped outside the old cycle. And from that position, their behavior becomes something you observe rather than something that controls you. Respect begins to change when your words stop being promises and start becoming patterns. You can say, "I deserve better," 100 times. You can announce that you will never accept inconsistency again. But words without action eventually lose their weight. People pay attention to repeated behavior. And when your behavior finally matches your standards, the message becomes impossible to ignore. Suppose you tell someone that disappearing without explanation is not acceptable. Then they disappear again, and you immediately chase them. Your words have been contradicted by your behavior. There is no real boundary there. But suppose the same situation occurs, and this time you remain calm. You do not punish them. You do not create drama. You simply stop investing in a pattern that repeatedly hurts you. That action communicates more than any speech could. This is especially important in relationships where inconsistency has become normal. A person can become accustomed to hearing complaints and still continue the same behavior because nothing actually changes afterward. The argument ends, the emotions settle, everything returns to the old pattern. But consistency breaks that cycle. You do not need threats. You do not need to announce your departure every week. You do not need to create jealousy or perform indifference. You simply behave according to the standards you claim to possess. That means your yes means yes. Your no means no. Your availability is not unlimited. Your patience has limits. Your attention is not something another person automatically owns. Over time, this creates clarity. They begin understanding that your boundaries are not emotional reactions. They are principles. That distinction can change the way your behavior is interpreted. You are not trying to control them. You are controlling your own participation. And that is where real strength appears. You stop explaining the same standard repeatedly. You stop negotiating against yourself. You stop saying one thing while secretly hoping your actions will communicate something else. Your behavior becomes steady, predictable, and clear. Then even your silence can carry meaning, because they know it is connected to a standard rather than a temporary mood. And once that consistency becomes visible, the entire relationship begins operating under a different set of expectations. This is the part they may never admit out loud. The deepest bruise to the ego is not jealousy. It is not seeing you with someone else. It is the sudden realization that you are capable of leaving the pattern behind. For a long time, they may have assumed your emotional availability was permanent. They could step back, create distance, disappear for a while, and still believe you would remain exactly where they left you. Then something changes. You stop waiting. You stop building your days around their attention. You stop interpreting every silence as a reason to reach out. You stop treating their uncertainty as a problem that you must solve. And slowly they may recognize something uncomfortable. Your presence was never guaranteed. You stayed because you chose to stay. You cared because you chose to care. And choices can change. That realization can hit differently from ordinary rejection. Rejection says, "I do not want you." Your independence says something more complicated. "I wanted this, but I will not abandon myself to keep it." There is dignity in that distinction. You are not trying to punish them. You are simply refusing to make their comfort more important than your own emotional stability. For someone who relies heavily on distance to regulate closeness, this can create a powerful contradiction. Distance once provided control, but now distance carries a cost. The more they step away, the more room you have to build a life without them. And eventually they may realize that the person they expected to keep chasing is no longer standing still. This is where the old assumption begins to collapse. They may have believed you were emotionally attached enough to tolerate anything. Now your actions show something different. You can love deeply and still walk away from inconsistency. You can remember someone fondly without returning to the same unhealthy pattern. And that is the real shift. You did not bruise their ego by hurting them. You bruised the old belief that you would always be available on their terms. Suddenly, losing you is no longer an abstract possibility. It becomes a consequence they must consider whenever they choose distance. Now comes the part where many people make the biggest mistake. The moment an avoidant person reaches out, they assume everything has changed. One message arrives. One call appears. Suddenly the silence is broken, and hope rushes back in. But attention is not the same as transformation. Contact is not the same as commitment. And a sudden return does not automatically mean the underlying pattern has disappeared. They may reach out because they genuinely miss you. They may miss the emotional connection, the familiarity, your presence, or the comfort they associated with you. They may even feel the loss more strongly once your attention is no longer guaranteed. But none of those feelings by themselves prove that they are ready for a healthier relationship. This is where you must become an observer rather than a believer. Listen to their words, but watch their behavior. Are they becoming more consistent? Are they communicating more clearly? Are they making space for your needs instead of disappearing whenever intimacy increases? Are they taking responsibility for the distance they created? One emotional message can feel powerful. One late-night confession can feel meaningful. But real change usually becomes visible through repetition. The person who once disappeared may now communicate when something feels uncomfortable. The person who avoided difficult conversations may begin staying present. The person who expected you to carry the emotional work may start contributing equally. That is the difference between a reaction and growth. A reaction can happen in a moment. Growth requires a pattern. So when they come closer, you do not need to punish them. You do not need to reject them just to prove your strength. You can remain open while remaining observant. Let their actions earn deeper trust. Because the real question is not, did they come back? The real question is, can they stay? Can they remain consistent after the excitement fades? Can they handle closeness without immediately creating distance? Can their behavior support the connection their words are promising? That is where the truth begins to reveal itself. The greatest shift happens when you stop trying to make them respect you. Read that again. Because the moment your behavior is organized around earning someone's respect, you have already handed them too much power. You start measuring every decision by their reaction. You wonder whether they noticed your silence, whether they miss you, whether they regret losing you. But real strength begins when those questions stop controlling you. You are no longer trying to make an avoidant chase. You are no longer designing your behavior around creating fear of loss. You are simply becoming consistent with your own standards. You care, but you refuse to abandon yourself. You can love someone and still recognize that repeated inconsistency is not something you are required to tolerate. That is where the meaning of the entire journey changes. The goal was never to bruise their ego. It was never to make them jealous, desperate, or emotionally uncomfortable. The real goal was to stop betraying yourself just to keep someone close. Once you understand that, your behavior becomes calmer, your boundaries become stronger, your decisions become clearer. And something interesting happens when you reach that point. Their approval starts losing its power over you. Their silence does not destroy your confidence. Their attention does not define your worth. Their return does not suddenly make you valuable. You already know your value because you are finally acting like someone who believes it. That is the real transformation. You stop asking, how can I make them respect me? And start asking, am I respecting myself? That question changes everything. It changes the people you tolerate. It changes the boundaries you maintain. It changes the relationships you remain invested in. And perhaps they come closer. Perhaps they recognize the change. Perhaps they finally understand that your presence was never guaranteed. But by then, something far more important has happened. You no longer need their reaction to validate your growth. The person they respect most is often the person who refuses to abandon themselves for love. And once you become that person, their distance may still hurt, but it no longer controls your direction.